And this is like his special skill. So, well, we'll see what happens. And Praggnanandhaa has kicked off and he's moved the queen pawn two squares forward.
Yep, so 1d4 to start this game. When they met last month, it was colours reversed. Magnus actually had white there, and he lost eventually. And Magnus, does he know the game has started? He does. He brings his knight out, so very standard stuff. Praggnanandhaa just trying to occupy the centre with pawns here. So Magnus, what's he going to adopt as a strategy in the opening? Okay, he creates the fianchetto. Is he going to go for the Grunfeld defence, a really counter-attacking opening, but very direct? Or is he going to play maybe... OK, he does go for the Grunfeld. I was going to say the King's Indian defence, just allowing white to take the whole centre. That's also equally risky. And we see a trade of pawns. Knight's also leaving the board.
Wow.
And
moving all over the place here.
Yeah, these two players, big experts in this opening. Praggnanandhaa, as white against the Grunfeld defence, he won a really nice game just a couple of months ago in Vaikanze against the Swedish #1, Niels Grandelia. So he has fond memories of this opening. Magnus occasionally uses this opening as black, but I remember having a conversation with him in a taxi in, I think, 2010, and he said he hates the Grunfeld defence. There's too much to memorise, too much to learn. And here we go. Already quite a rare move, bringing black's bishop out. Normally we see black castle the king away to safety. And if you look at the centre of the board as well, white has the pawns there, occupying a lot of space. Black has to chip away at those white pawns from the side, from afar, using the two bishops, and, OK, eventually black does castle the king. So it's still very tense. It's all about whether white can maintain the centre. If he does, then Praggnanandhaa will have the advantage. If black can maybe trade off white central pawns, then black should be OK.
OK. Do you have a favourite opening, Kira?
Yeah, no, I do like to play a bit Sicilian. I'm
okay.
trying to experiment with that, but I'm not very good at it. But I'm just wondering about this one, because in my experience, you talked about castling, and if you cast a bit late, it's kind of like I never get to do it.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's why Praggnanandhaa now has just sacrificed a pawn, actually, because it was the #1 priority for white to get the king castled. Otherwise, as you mentioned, it would have been too late. Otherwise, the white king might have come under heavy fire. And Magnus, he's really being greedy. Look at that black queen. She's offside.
Wow.
She's not really doing too much. She's out in Siberia somewhere, just kind of on her own adventure. But she has grabbed one pawn in the process. So actually, Pragg, he's being ambitious. He's sacrificed a pawn. And look at this, pushing pawns in the centre. He's gaining space.
And I can tell you, this is a new move. It's not actually normal for white to, in this position, push that pawn forward. It's much more normal to actually attack the queen with the rook. And here we're now in analysis territory. Who has studied this line? What do you think, David?
Yeah, I mean, it might be a brand new move, but it's quite a common idea, at least. White just pushing pawns as far forward down the board as possible. Also, you look at this white pawn in the centre, it could be joined by the pawn next to it, and we could see a pass pawn being created very, very shortly. Meanwhile, I don't like the fact that black's queen is stuck out there on her own. There's a big risk of her, firstly, getting trapped, and secondly, she's going to have to lose a lot of time kind of rejoining the rest of her pieces later on. She's going to have to retreat at least twice over the next few moves. So pawn sacrifices, I'm a bit materialistic. I'm too scared to go for them with white, but here white has fantastic compensation for that sacrificed pawn. And Magnus needs to speed up and catch up with development, so therefore he brings his knight into the game. And yeah, Jovanka, as you know, I'm kind of a Grunfeld connoisseur. I've been playing it my whole life as black, but the older I get, the more I think it's just too risky. White has too many pawns in the centre of the board, and yeah, again, as mentioned, it's not necessarily Magnus's favourite type of position. So a really clever opening choice here from Praggnanandhaa. And after this trade, white gets the bishop pair. And wow, OK, he actually captures back with a pawn here, Praggnanandhaa. Look at those pawns now on the F file. They're doubled. That's a very controversial decision. But he does have even more pawns now controlling central squares. This one is already promising. I think we're going to get a lot of excitement in this game already.
Nice.
It's not one of those dull, maybe solid openings I would have expected from Magnus after losing last month to Pragg. I think he's fighting fire with fire here. And OK, let's see what happens.
Yeah, for me, it's like a sign of confidence from Praggnanandhaa that he actually recaptures that piece by actually breaking the rules, because often you don't want to be playing this type of move because, you know, look at the white king. Doesn't have too many protectors around it. However, you know, as David mentioned, the black queen totally offside. But yeah, I like what Praggnanandhaa has done. Actually, I think it's very brave, very bold, and I applauded.
Nice.
And if you look at the clock times as well, he's actually got more time than he started with Praggnanandhaa. So to me, that says he studied it before. Maybe with his coach that we interviewed yesterday, Ramesh, maybe he just thought, OK, Magnus is least comfortable when he's being attacked. We've seen him lose a few games on the tour when the Black King comes under fire or when his opponent is pushing everything forward. So he's definitely playing against the man, not only against the board. And there we go, the Black Queen losing a bit more time, going back where she came from.
All right. Well, interesting game we're heading into. And Kira, I wanted to ask you, because obviously being Norwegian, you said you played chess as a kid, and then kids came and work came, and time, trouble to have time to play. But what did it mean that Magnus became world champion, that a Norwegian became world champion in 2013? Did that spark your interest again?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
It came back, and I think it's done that for a lot of my friends and actually half of the Norwegian population.
Yeah.
So because I just played once in a while with friends, typically some late evenings, but then after Magnus starting to win and they start to show it, live on TV, I started to play as often as I can. So I think that's for many people. Yeah.
Yeah. How surreal, right? I remember I was a student when he became world champion. Suddenly, our conversation every day would be about chess. And we were like, what is this? What's happening to us?
Exactly. I mean, now I'm thinking I need to take my daughter to a chess club. She's 7, so it's about time, but she's not that interested. My son, who's 4, is more interested.
Oh.
But maybe I wouldn't have thought that 10 years ago. I would just have parked that idea, whole chess idea. But now I'm going to go to the local chess club as soon as I can.
Wow.
With at least one of them.
And well, reminds me of your interview with Henrik Carlsen, Jovanka. He also, around, was it like 4 years old with Magnus? He noticed some qualities in Magnus.
Yeah, he noticed some personality traits in Magnus that he thought, hang on, maybe Magnus will be a good chess player. But he actually said the very first time he tried to teach Magnus and his older sister Ellen some chess, it was a disaster. It did not go well, And he thought, how could I be so wrong about this? And, they didn't really enjoy it. But then I think because Henrik was so interested in the game that when Henrik introduced the game later on, the children were a little bit older and they could understand things more. And it kind of bit both of them. Yeah. And both of them became really, really interested in the game. And Magnus, frankly, became obsessed. He was studying it and just absorbing chess 24 hours of the day.
Yeah, I remember Henrik, he said that he would play against Magnus with one pawn and he would win. With his one pawn, he would be able to queen it and just win the game. So it's nice to hear that even Magnus Carlsen has lost.
Yeah, and I think a lot of our viewers actually have a similar story. They learn when they're young from parents or grandparents, and then life gets in the way, things happen, but they come back to it in later life, and that's, for me, that's the main thing. I mean, you talk about Henrik Carlsen, his sister. I mean, they're such a close family, and I think chess is one thing that really kind of helped them bond at a young age. So yeah, it's nice to hear. I think you should definitely take your son and daughter to the chess club.
Definitely, but I won't do like my dad, because when I beat him first time, he never played again.
No.
So I didn't have that, close coach at home. But I will stay in there as long as possible.
Yeah. No, you definitely don't give up the game when your child beats you. In fact, you should take the inspiration from an Australian grandmaster, actually, because he was really into chess at an early age, but then he kind of, life got in the way. But then his son started becoming interested in chess. And so he thought, oh, hang on a second, I actually have to help my son get better because there are no coaches. Yeah. So he actually picked up the game and started studying the game to get better, just to help his child.
Wow.
Yeah, and together, I think the father became like a quite a strong player, became a FIDE master, which is around about 2,300, and the son is now one of the country's top grandmasters. So
who is it?
It's Anton Smirnov from Australia.
Wow, what a story.
I love that.
Yeah. It's so cool with chess as well. It's never too late, right?
No.
But I think it is a good idea to learn when you're a kid, like with a language, right? Your brain just absorbs it better.
Well, I'm not sure, actually, because I think when you're an adult, you can actually understand the strategies much better.
Yeah, that's true.
And you can understand how chess is a language. Oops. I might have broken the chair there. My apologies.
Live TV.
And I just think that when you're an adult, you can process everything that you need to be doing. You can actually take a look back at the board and you can understand where the pieces should go. You can remember things that people have said to you in a way that children can't. Children often just go, yeah, well, understood, and then they repeat the mistake maybe about 20 or 30 times, and then the message gets through.
Yeah.
And adults, they don't play as quickly either, which is very good, because children play sometimes a little bit too quickly.
Yeah. Well, Praggnanandhaa, 16, not a kid anymore. He didn't play fast in this move, thinking for 3 minutes, I think.
Yeah,
moving his queen.
3-4 minutes. And when we had his coach on yesterday, Ramesh, he said one of Prag's biggest weaknesses is time trouble, actually thinking a bit too much.
Ah.
And when I played him a few months ago as well, normally I'm the one shorter on time, but I think there were several moments he spent 30, 40 minutes on one move. So, OK, this move, I'm not a huge fan. Let's jump into the position to show what Praggnanandhaa's thinking is behind just pushing his queen forward only one square. On the last turn, this pawn was actually under fire from the bishop and by the queen. So it's attacked twice, only defended once by White's rook. That's why Pragg has lifted his queen up, to just add extra protection to this pawn. However, White's whole plan, the whole reason he's a pawn down, is because he wants to push everything forward. So to me, the most natural would have been to push this pawn forward, maybe create this nice little pawn chain. And actually, Magnus has just stopped that. Just before this, before we go into this move, another plan for White to push this pawn forward and then the central pawn. And if, for example, Black had just wasted time, Magnus, of course, not doing this, then suddenly White obtains just the strongest pawns you will ever see. But the reason now I wasn't such a fan of this move by Pragg is because he has allowed Magnus, after pushing his queen forward, to block things up. And this looks like a pawn sacrifice by Black. It is a pawn sacrifice, but the biggest priority is to stop White from pushing forward himself. And if Pragg now takes this pawn with his bishop, then there will be consequences. You open up lines for the Black rooks, and suddenly Black's rook is looking at the bishop and the pawn behind it. Also, the Black knight might jump into the center, hitting the bishop, hitting some pawns, and suddenly things are opening up, but maybe just not while Pragg is ready. So really interesting move there, and Magnus played it quite quickly. He was thinking while Pragg was running down on the clock. So this is the current position. I'm expecting to maybe see this pawn captured. I don't think you can allow it to sit in your half of the board for too long, because then suddenly Black is the one rolling with his pawns down the board, what we call a pawn storm. But after it is captured, I think the rook will slide across, and Pragg, once he moves the bishop back, we'll see Magnus get greedy once again by grabbing this pawn with his bishop, maybe even with his rook. And things are opening up, things are getting traded, but I think Pragg missed an opportunity to start rolling forward with his pawns there. Maybe just a bit too hesitant, and again, spending quite a bit of time on the clock.
Yeah, and the final position that you showed in your variation, to me, it looked like Black was almost a clear pawn up.
Yeah.
And it seemed like the timing had passed for White. And
White's advantage, sorry, that it just lies in the centre of the board.
Yeah.
So that's why you have to push pawns in the centre. And you mentioned Black being a pawn up. Black actually has a 2 versus 0 advantage of pawns if you look on the left side. So if everything else gets traded off, those 2 Black pawns are just going to slowly walk up the board and promote to a new queen later. So, yeah, Jovanka, not such a fan of Pragg's decision?
No, I'm not a fan of the decision, primarily because of Magnus's move. I mean, it's quite an instructive idea, actually. And just simply trying to put a pawn on White's side of the board and just being a wedge there, preventing this pawn's expansion. But one thing I did wonder was whether Praggnanandhaa could kind of pivot and just go back to his normal idea of just expanding on the centre.
Yeah, those doubled pawns that White has on that F-line. One of them can step forward. You can try and push a pawn in the centre later to try and block out Black's bishop. If you look at Black's bishop, that's what we call the fianchetto, and it's on a fantastic diagonal, as we mentioned, staring down at some pawns, controlling all the dark squares. So you need to block that guy out the game. And yeah, as you mentioned, Jovanka, I think only really 2 choices here. Either you remove that Black pawn from the board because it's just a thorn in your side, or you push pawns, but he finds a third option, Pragg, sliding his queen across. Maybe this was his idea all along. But Magnus making a face, surprised by that one. I must admit, I'm surprised too. It wasn't on my radar. It's not normally kind of a conventional idea to put your queen opposite your opponent's bishop. Yes, there's a pawn in the way. Yes, you're attacking a pawn with the white queen on this line, but it feels a bit superficial. Black can easily deal with that threat.
So what could be his plan?
Well, I think it's like like David mentioned, like a one-track mind. You know, basically he's thinking, if black is careless and maybe pushes the pawn that's under fire 2 squares or even 1 square, then the white rook will just attack the queen, and the queen doesn't have a great place to go to. That's it. And the problem is that's a very simple threat, but it can easily be handled, as David mentioned.
Yeah, so this pawn attacked, and the line Jovanka was mentioning there is this pawn, it's under fire, it might as well march forward, protected by its queen. But then Prag's idea surely is to bring the rook across. To be honest, I'm not sure this even works. Yes, you're attacking the queen, but now you've lost protection once more of this pawn. So black can actually play queen takes pawn, defended by her bishop, and I guess Pragg wants to capture this pawn now. We'll see a trade of some pawns, both queens getting a bit active, but it feels just all wrong for white somehow. The queen can even move out the way. She can offer a trade, for example, or she can maybe even step down the board, attacking this bishop, attacking this rook. And I don't know, Pragg's lost control. Earlier, all his pieces were centralized, kind of bunched up together, protecting each other. Suddenly, the queen is out on her own. This rook, as mentioned, just on a bad square. So I'm expecting this from Magnus, just to pick up this pawn and push it. But the other option would be to maybe a bit safer, drop the queen back, protect the pawn next to it, and keeping an eye on this guy as well.
Okay, so Kiri, with your level, if you came to the good knight and saw 2 people playing this position, would you be able to sort of say, "Ooh, I want to play with the black pieces here"?
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking the last one you mentioned that pull the queen back to the C line, because then you can also go quite quickly over to the other line. Because I think that in the long run, I think that the white king is a bit open, isn't it?
Yeah.
On the G line there. So that's would be my long-term goal. But then you also, I mean, the A and the B pawns of Magnus. You mentioned some moves there where white is actually then starting to pick out those, and I think also that would be good for white, right?
Yeah, quite possibly. I mean, white would love, for example, to use the queen and grab a couple of pawns, but it's all about timing right now. And Magnus, you can see right now he's got his kind of calculation face on. He's trying to work out 2 or 3 steps in advance. But I think if he's unsure about the evaluation, as you mentioned there, about his pawns disappearing, then he'll take a step back and he'll take that safe option. And yeah, you also mentioned white's king. You're right, the pawn structure around it is shattered, and especially if the black knight somehow creeps forward towards that white king, and then you combine the queen with it, then Pragg will regret having opened up his king. At the moment, I guess he's not too worried just because there are no black pieces around, but definitely something long-term for Pragg to keep an eye on. So yeah, well spotted, because Magnus, he's going to be having these things in his mind. He's going to have sneaky ideas later on, and if Pragg is too slow, then those ideas might become reality. Yeah,
he's definitely in evaluation mode, right? And I think he's calculating the line that you highlighted. He's trying to sit there and make an assessment, because the resulting position at the end, yes, it could be good for black, but it could also be good for white if you...
It makes it more messy, that's the only thing. So safe option, retreating the black queen. Messier option, but maybe quite good for black, would be to push some pawns. Yeah. So that's where we talk about styles in chess. Every player has different preferences, styles. Magnus likes to keep control if he can, in general. So yeah, the more I think about it, the more I'm on your side there, retreating the queen.
Yeah, retreating the queen is something like, it's a move that, like David says, you have in your pocket.
Yeah.
It's a good move. It's okay to have. You can always fall back on that if you decide on the more forcing line that it isn't quite the right move for you.
Now, I have a question about, so we see doubled pawns, and next to the white doubled pawns, we have double bishops. Is double bishops actually a good thing? I mean, they will be controlling a lot of lines.
Yeah, in general, I mean, especially here, white's bishops are fantastic, because I guess together they'll control all the color complexes, and they'll control all the squares, especially if they're quite centralized. Bishops are great long-range pieces, so black's bishop also good on this long diagonal. But white's bishops have the potential to control both sides of the board. And, okay, he does go for the messier option, the more ambitious option, but
nice
riskier.
Spotted, Kira.
Yes.
Yeah.
And, okay, now we are definitely expecting white's rook to slide across to attack the black queen, because otherwise, Pragg's whole idea of kind of switching his queen over to this left side doesn't really have a purpose. So if he's consistent, Pragg now will bring his rook across and attack the black queen.
And he needs to play quite fast now. He has spent a lot of time, but Magnus spent like 4 minutes on his previous move. So it's not dramatic on the clock, but he did spend quite a long time on 2 moves there, Pragg.
Yeah, and I guess the players, I mean, especially at this top level, or the players we see, they're very good at sensing critical moments. So that was just it's more stylistic decision, safe option or really aggressive, and that's why Magnus invested so much time there. Normally we don't see it from him. Normally he's very instinctive and he likes to stay ahead on the clock if he can. But I think it was a good moment to stop and pause for a while.
Absolutely.
But if you play at 11 o'clock in the night, how does that affect you?
Yeah.
Well, it depends on what kind of person you are. And I would assume that the Praggnanandhaa has actually, and he has in fact attacked the queen with his rook. So it just depends, if you're a morning person, this is going to be very, very difficult for you, and you probably need to do some training. For instance, you probably actually have to, in preparation for this event, actually start playing at 10:30 p.m. at night. So that your brain gets used to working on chess as opposed to sleeping.
Because you have to be fresh, right? If you're going to play chess for 4 hours like these players are doing.
Yeah. So, I mean, their preparation beforehand would be just, waking up later and then 10:30 p.m. study chess.
Yeah.
And then you have to study chess, I guess, for 5 hours. And, but it's difficult. It is difficult. Okay, so
it's my favourite time of day, 10:30 p.m. to start playing chess.
You would thrive in this tournament, David.
Yeah, and meanwhile, as predicted, this trade of pawns, both queens getting a bit greedy there and grabbing the opponent's pawns. And I remember having a chat with Magnus years and years ago, and he said that he'd done a bit of research, and apparently the mind is at its kind of most sharp, most focused 4 to 6 hours after waking up. So imagine if you start at 10:30 p.m. and you've been awake since 8 in the morning. It's impossible. So you definitely, chess players in general are quite nocturnal, but you definitely have to plan for that. And as Jovanka says, acclimatise. Okay, this move, very surprising, I must admit, from Magnus. He's brought his knight out. The knight was attacked by the white queen, but this knight can be captured in some scenarios by white's dark squared bishop. Also, it's a bit loose. Yes, it's defended by a pawn right now, but that black pawn defending the black knight is under fire itself. It's a bit shaky, and just instinctively it feels like an okay move, but maybe not the move Magnus wanted to play. Maybe just he's being practical, didn't want to invest another 5 minutes on calculating sharp variations.
So what should he have done? Would you have preferred to see it go the other way?
Yeah,
backwards, or?
Yeah, I was thinking maybe you don't even have to defend this knight, which is under fire. I thought maybe you could start counterattacking, as I mentioned. One option, it is complicated, one option is just bring the queen down 1 square, counterattacking against white's bishop. And here that idea of breaking towards the white king would be in effect. If the black knight is captured, for example, you could take this bishop. Now you can start sneakily attacking these doubled pawns, creeping over towards this king. It doesn't feel too safe anymore with the black queen nearby. And the other purpose, of course, behind this black queen move would be to unblock the bishop's diagonal, to actually hit this rook in the corner with the bishop. The reason Magnus didn't go for this, maybe, is because you have to calculate a lot further. You have to think, OK, what happens if this bishop drops back to attack the black queen? Will the black queen get trapped? It's running out of squares. And it gets very, very complicated. I mean, the knight is under fire. The queen is under fire. Maybe Magnus just thought, OK, none of this nonsense. Let's just keep everything nice and protected, which is a good kind of practical idea, especially in speed chess, rapid chess. If this was a long game, Magnus maybe would have spent time on this queen move, but he brings his knight to the side, and as mentioned, it can be captured by white's bishop, but here, after a recapture, suddenly the rooks are looking at each other, and after a rook trade, and I think white's queen would just be too far away here, and it's all about the dark squares. Black's queen could start sneaking towards the white king. So we do see a couple of quick moves instead. The white rook switching back again where it came from, and now black's queen retreating. Oof, I'm starting to like black's position again. I know I wasn't so sure about this black move, this black knight move, but again, once it's captured, suddenly the queen is super near the white king, starting an attack already. Yeah,
I have to say I really love this knight move. Big fan of it because it sets that strategical trap that you mentioned. You entice white to perhaps exchange with the dark square bishops, and then it would be opposite color bishops, and black would just be completely supreme on the dark squares.
Yeah, and just to show your point, Jovanka, for example, here, say the black queen checks, suddenly opposite colour bishops, but this bishop blocked in by its own pawns, staring at its own pawns, and suddenly, again, if white is careless, then is checkmate on the dark squares. The queen and bishop are going to line up, and the king is just doomed. So, yeah, opposite colour bishops would not be in white's favour here.
And the thing is, though, it's really a perpetual trap that he's kind of setting to white. He's saying, hey, if you ever want to win back the pawn that is sitting on the c4 square, and it's going to be a menacing pawn, especially if it advances one square forward, well, you're going to give me the dark squares. So what is it? Are you going to let me live with an extra pawn, or you're going to give up your dark squares? And this is really, really very unpleasant. If I were Praggnanandhaa right now, I might be panicking.
Yeah. Also, a really clever choice of square for the black queen, because the white bishop, the light squared bishop, can actually capture this pawn, but suddenly it would lose protection of one of the doubled pawns, and the queen, you can't let it anywhere near your king like this. The queen attacking this pawn, this pawn. I think Magnus really clever there with his choice of square. And as Jovanka mentioned, slight panic maybe for Pragg. I think he needs to just shore up and defend his king's position, maybe by pushing a pawn forward, maybe by even lifting his king up the board just to protect the pawns around it. And actually, he has done just that. So still very tense. Black still needs to find a way to improve. But as Jovanka mentioned again, this pawn is going to advance, and it's going to be very, very difficult for white to keep an eye on it for the rest of the game.
Okay. So the bar isn't too excited, about it. It's saying roughly draw. So in human terms, is this much more? Would you put the bar much more over to Magnus'
human
side?
terms, I personally would put the bar quite far to Magnus's side.
Okay.
I would even say maybe close to one pawn advantage in computer talk. I just think Magnus has a great shot at putting white under pressure and making Praggnanandhaa just enticing him to make a mistake.
Yeah, after all, if we do a quick count, black is one pawn up, so +1 for black, according to the computer, would be very logical. But this is the type of position where if white wins the pawn back, the evaluation bar will just be roughly 0.0 around the middle. But if black keeps the pawn, the advantage will grow and grow with every move. So there we go. OK, he does indeed just put his pawn on a square. It's protected. So the black queen, black bishop really keeping that pawn under their gaze. And here we go. Pragg's idea is to just push in the centre. He should have done this, I feel, maybe 5-10 moves ago, but better late than never. And if the white e-pawn steps forward now, it will attack the black queen. It will cut the connection with the black queen as well, and the bishop to that very far advanced black pawn.
And simultaneously, the bar went up for Magnus, as did our donation bar for UNICEF. We have passed $53,000 now in the fundraiser. So thank you to everyone for joining in and keep donating. It's so important, right, kiddo? I mean, for people sitting at home, seeing pictures on the news, it's very hard to find a way to help. What is the best way for people to help organizations like UNICEF do their job?
The best is to donate money, actually, and to buy the Twinkie Winkie suit for a lot of money. That's the best way. I mean, right now we're seeing a lot of goodwill. We're seeing a lot of hearts, warm hearts in Norway. But in the long run, it's money to organizations that are on the ground that is the most solid help.
And professional and know what, because obviously psychologically as well for children experiencing bombs, experiencing fleeing, I guess it needs professional help to make sure they're not traumatized for life as well.
No, definitely. You need professional help, and also you need equipment, professional equipment. I mean, you need real medicines in the hospitals. You need midwives being there to deliver children. And it costs money, of course. And you have a lot of organizations like UNICEF and some others that are really good at what they're doing. UNICEF has been doing it for more than 75 years.
Really? Wow. Yeah, that's what we all can do. Donate to help UNICEF, help the people of Ukraine. This is the Charity Cup. So it is about donating and, of course, also about chess community coming together and moves coming out.
Yeah, moves coming out, and we've just seen what we call en passant. So black's pawn advancing 2 squares, but white was able to capture it as if it just moved 1 square. Often if you can play en passant, you want to, just to stop your opponent gaining space, bypassing you. But after this trade of pawns, we've seen black's queen dodge out the way and white now try and block things up in the centre with his pawns. And now there is a bit of a threat in the position. White's rook just wants to step up 2 squares and capture this annoying black passed pawn. So I'm expecting Magnus to maybe just defend that with one of his rooks. One of the black rooks could slide across to the c-file and just defend this pawn. You don't really want to allow white to capture it, because then suddenly white will have the bishop pair and no other real disadvantages in the position. I like what Prag's actually done with the white king. It still looks a bit vulnerable, but the light-squared bishop, the white light-squared bishop, can plug any holes there, can block any checks coming in the near future. So still very tense, and Pragg, he's tenacious. He's a great fighter, as all young players are, and he's making it difficult for Magnus to utilize to convert his one-pawn advantage.
It looks more solid now.
Yeah.
So how do you get in there with the black officers?
Well,
Yeah, it's tricky.
yeah, it is tricky. I like David's suggestion of just simply activating one of the rooks, getting behind its own pass pawn. Another suggestion that kind of sprang to my mind was simply to look at white's last move and just see what move is available as a consequence of white's last move. And that was white just advanced the pawn forward, and the d5 square in the middle of the board, that was protected. Now it's not protected. So maybe the black knight can jump into the middle of the board. That's one consequence. And it defends. Okay, and Magnus has played it.
Got your magic ball out, predicting the future.
No, it was taught by a Russian grandmaster, Natalia. I've forgotten her surname, Kosintseva. And she said that this was her rule, hard and fast rule, when she was playing very, very quickly. She would just simply look at the opponent's last move and think, right, what can she now play as a result of that move? And then calculate that one first. And then if it was good, that was good.
Yeah.
I must admit, though, I don't like that move at all. Yes, the knight can jump in, but what's that knight actually doing? It's really loose. And actually, the black queen is the only defender, and Praggnanandhaa now trying to kick away the defender of that black knight. So the queen is under fire from this white bishop. The queen can't move. There's no safe square that you can go to that maintains the protection of black's knight in the centre. So you only have two options, really. You have to block this attack with a black pawn, or you have to use the black knight and capture white's bishop in the centre with check, the dark square bishop. But that trade would lead to opposite colour bishops, but this time, if you compare the remaining bishops, white's light square bishop, decent piece, attacking the black queen, black's bishop now blocked in. So I think that trade would help Praggnanandhaa get to safety. And I'm not seeing a way black can keep the extra pawn. I think black should have just invited the remaining pieces into the party. The black rooks were doing nothing. The black knight was okay, but the black rooks were doing nothing. So maybe it was more important to prioritise those pieces.
Mm-hmm. This is what makes chess so complicated, because, you know, there's no hard and fast rules. What works in one position doesn't work in another position. And I have to say, I fully agree with David's point, because, I mean, the move that kind of sprang to mind was actually just picking up the pawn and blocking the light squared bishop's attack on the queen. But then, look at the black bishop. It's just sat there and it will never, ever get out so easily.
Yeah,
I mean, it wants to be on that long diagonal, but it wants an open file.
Yeah, but also if you push forward, Ivanka, suddenly the bishop might just slide back. And if you look at the dark squares, suddenly there's a pin on this diagonal.
Exactly.
It's really loose. You have no influence on the light squares for black. And yes, you might see a trade, but OK, the rook is hit. And if you're careless now and put the rook on the wrong square, then the bishop's going to come forward and pin and win the black queen. So, yeah, some danger in Magnus's position. And as mentioned, in the current position, the black queen under fire, she can't move because she has to stay protecting her knight. There's no other safe square. And if you have to take off this bishop, it's a check so you don't lose your queen. Then suddenly, no matter where you put the black queen now, this pawn is going to drop off. This has actually happened. This is the current position. Black gives a check, but this is easily blocked by white's rook. And again, problems with the queen. It's almost out of squares. You only have, is it one safe square here? OK, he's gone back to the only safe square, and now this pawn is indeed dropping. Note how the black rooks want to defend this pawn, but the white bishop has controlled this key square. So Praggnanandhaa doing everything right. And if this pawn falls, I think he will be able to at least hold the game. The only bad thing about white's position now is the king slightly open still.
Is any result possible here?
Still anything possible. Magnus could convert this if he can keep hold of his pawn, but I don't think he will be able to. That's the problem. And if he loses this pawn, then suddenly white's bishop, as mentioned, better than the black bishop. Black's bishop just purely a passive piece right now.
You know, I really do like Praggnanandhaa's position. And he's turned it around, in my opinion, because his bishop is better than the black's bishop, and this is what counts when it comes to opposite-coloured bishops. But Magnus, he's being resourceful as ever. You know, he's really trying to delay Praggnanandhaa winning the pawn.
Look at this last move by Praggnanandhaa. He is fearless, this teenager. There's actually a pin on the second row now, and we've talked about this in the past. Rooks on the second row for black. That's where they want to be. There's normally targets, there's pawns, there's kings to look at, but he doesn't care. He just steps forward with his king, leading from the front, and this king now is off the second rank, so this rook is once again released from the pin, and the threat is renewed of taking this pawn. And he's not scared of advancing his king, because at the moment, at least temporarily, there are no attacking pieces around it. And it's also guarded by a lot of pawns, this pawn, this pawn, this pawn, and the bishop's doing a great job as well of just keeping that white king safe. It's normally what we don't recommend, advancing your king so far forward with the queen still on the board, but it just shows Praggnanandhaa, he knows when to break the rules, when to follow them.
All right. And Jürgen van Foreest, wow, a huge win for him against world number 3, Ding Liren, and important points as well for Van Foreest in the fight to qualify for the knockout stage. That must be a big win for him against one of the best players in the world. Just like it was for Praggnanandhaa a month ago when he won against Magnus Carlsen with the white pieces. Are we seeing in online rapid chess, with the black pieces, sorry, are we seeing in online rapid chess, David, more wins with the black pieces? I mean, you mentioned also Liam Le yesterday, 3 wins with the black pieces.
Yeah, I think so. There have been rounds in the past, actually, on the Champions Chess Tour, many black wins.
Yeah.
I guess the advantage of the first move is usually the fact you can choose your type of position, but in rapid chess, when things get a bit messy later in the game, white, black, it doesn't really matter too much. And, OK, meanwhile, Magnus, with the black pieces, trying to go on the counter, he's throwing pawns towards the white king. That's good. But first of all, he's also trying to annoy this white bishop, trying to kick it away from its strong square. So I'm expecting to see that bishop maybe retreat, but Praggnanandhaa, OK, he does retreat. I was going to say, is he going to be ambitious, maybe move that bishop into the black half of the board? I think if he gets an extra move, he would love to line up this white bishop with the black king on the light square diagonal. And still in the balance, still anything can happen.
And both queens still on the board. Is that a sign they're both still ambitious in this game?
Yes, and talking of ambitious, Ivanka.
Yeah, it's just, I was thinking about it. I was wondering how I could concoct some kind of mating attack there. But Magnus doesn't even bother retreating the queen. He's like, you know, let's just give up a pawn, draw the king out onto the 4th row, and maybe the queen can retreat backwards with some time.
Wow, and actually there's a cunning trap behind this pawn move. It looks like black's just giving up a pawn for free, but let's keep an eye on the players. We might see a reaction. They're low on time as well. This pawn is poisoned. White should not get greedy and take it. If you take this pawn, you've actually walked, OK, firstly too far forward, but onto the same rank as your queen. So the queen and king are actually lined up, and black can play an amazing move now. He can break this bishop out of its cage. He can capture this pawn in the center of the board, because suddenly, if the bishop is taken, then the black rook slides back. And this is what we call a pin, kind of a skewer as well. The white queen has to give herself up just for a rook. So Pragg, he doesn't put his king and queen on this vulnerable rank. He retreats that king. And yeah, really well spotted there from the teenager once again, spotting all the danger and planting his king backwards. And OK, a couple of quick moves. The black rook trying to join the second rank. Remember, we talked about it. That's where the king is. But Praggnanandhaa saying, no, I'm blocking you out. And now he's lining up against the black king. Both kings under heavy fire. And black's king sidesteps as well. This one is really heating up. The evaluation bar going in Magnus's favour. I think it's purely because white's king now slightly more vulnerable than its counterpart, but still very tense. And this is the type of position the evaluation bar might swing. Just one move by either side, one careless move, it might go off in the other side's favour.
Yeah, I have to say, Magnus has played like a lion to keep his pawn on c3. I thought it was doomed. I thought it was going to fall off the board any minute. And instead, he's found trick after trick to keep it on the board. And now it's not going to be captured at all.
Yeah.
I mean, because of the 2 rooks facing off against each other on the second row, and white can't even get greedy and can play bishop takes pawn, because the second rook will come down to the second row and join in the attack. And things are just really going from bad to worse, I think, for Praggnanandhaa.
I think it's about the clock. We mentioned the time trouble. Yes, he's super sharp. Yes, he spots tactics very quickly, but he's just spent too long, and he's in big, big trouble now. And Ivanka, have you spotted something?
Yeah, I'm just thinking, can you not play rook takes rook? Sorry, not check. Rook takes rook, and after rook takes rook, queen check, and then the queen can slide across and hit the 2 pieces.
You're right. I think we've just seen a huge blunder, a huge mistake from Pragg. Under time pressure, his king was leading from the front, but the king has had to just retreat, and yeah, there's an immediate win. I think we have to show this because Magnus can win on the spot with a series of actually quite logical moves, simple moves. Just trade the rooks off, capture these rooks. As Ivanka mentions, a check. No matter where the king goes, the black queen can actually come across now. The final move is the most difficult one to see, this last queen move, but it's simple. It's a double attack, hitting the rook, hitting the bishop, and one of these pieces will drop. The only way to save them both is to retreat your bishop to defend the rook, but this allows this monster to creep in, and this is a deadly check. Yeah, this one is just game over. It's check. You have to trade these rooks, and black is just going to promote this pawn on the next couple of moves.
Magnus has ticked under 30 seconds, 20 seconds left now. Do you think he's going to find that?
Yes.
If he follows the formula of checks, captures, and threats, then he will find it.
He doesn't
but he
find the
doesn't
win.
find it.
And I think sometimes
look at the bar.
Yeah, top players, they're too busy calculating. I've been guilty of this myself many times. We calculate, but we forget to go for the simple. As Ivanka mentions, we forget to look for checks sometimes, or captures, or threats. We just rule them out because maybe they weren't good on the previous few moves. So that's why you have to remind yourself, check, capture, threat, every turn. He's attacking the white bishop with the black queen now from the side, but Praggnanandhaa, okay, he backs that bishop up with his pawn. I think he could have moved that bishop maybe safely, but okay, we see a check now on the diagonal. And
whoa!
Yeah, again, the white king just in too much trouble. Praggnanandhaa, no time, and he's on the defensive side. It's impossible to defend when you have 20 seconds left.
And now the black queen comes into the e3 square, and it's virtually game over. The queen is going to plonk herself on the g3 square, give the white king a check, and nearly quite a few of white's pawns will fall. And now it's just about introducing everyone to the party, I think.
Bring that dark square bishop into the game. Yeah, I mean, as you mentioned, Ivanka, you can give a check with the black queen first, but the dark square bishop does join that party. And this might be the final blow. Suddenly, black has 3, maybe even 4 attacking pieces. The black rook keeping an eye on the second rank, the black queen supreme in the centre of the board, the black bishop joining the party, and also remember the rook at the top of the board. If it can somehow dislodge that bishop, it's just going to be game over. So,
yeah. And sad move from Praggnanandhaa when he just has to move his king around the board. It's not really what you want to do. You want to be attacking. You want to be using your rooks.
Yeah, and yeah, I praise that king march up the board, but I think Praggnanandhaa just not consistent, just not finding the right square for his king, and now he's just wasted too much time with it. And okay, there we go. Black is actually 2 pawns up now, and black has the attack. So finally, the tension is broken on the second rank. We do eventually see this rook trade, but that rook is replaced by a very strong pawn. And I think Praggnanandhaa is going to give up any moment. The black rook can actually capture the white bishop. I think that's game over instantly. There's maybe more simple ways to win. The black rook is the only piece left that needs to join in. And that will be it. Praggnanandhaa on the brink of defeat. Magnus, yeah, ruthless, and Kira, it came down all to that white king. You mentioned it 20, 30 moves ago. And that's why we've got to look for patterns if your opponent's king is loose. Okay, wow. Magnus there sitting back because he missed that his pawn could simply be captured. He's still winning, though, surely. He forgot that the white rook now covers the second rank. He thought he was giving checkmate next move with the black queen. He just needs to calm himself, and as soon as the black rook joins in, yeah, it's game over. Still. He was lucky he made a blunder, a hallucination, and it didn't affect anything.
And look at that. Yeah. Shaking his head and smiling at the same time.
It's what I call a happy accident.
Yeah. Those are very rare in chess. I mean, if you make a bad move, that's usually very bad news.
They're more common than you think.
Yeah,
you know.
There we go. This is a skewer. The white queen is now just has to give itself up for this black rook.
Yeah.
Black rook defended by its bishop. And, okay, even more brutal. Magnus is going to take some pawns first. Next move, the black bishop's going to retreat with a deadly check. And there we go. We have a result. Praggnanandhaa giving up.
Oh, and Praggnanandhaa, he just logs off Magnus Carlsen.